Who is Leah? Leah was the daughter of Laban, the sister of Rachel, a wife of Jacob, and the mother of 7 of Jacob's children. Leah's first mention in the Bible comes in the story of Jacob. After Jacob tricked his father and stole his brother's birthright, Genesis 27 verses 1 to 29, he was forced to flee to the home of his uncle Laban in Haran. There Jacob fell in love with Laban's younger daughter Rachel. Leah, being the older daughter, should have been the first to marry, but unfortunately, she was homely, whereas Rachel was beautiful, Genesis 29 verse 17. Because of his love for Rachel, Jacob made a deal with Laban to work 7 years for Rachel's hand in marriage. When Jacob completed the 7 years, he demanded Rachel as his wife, Genesis 29 verse 21. Laban threw a feast, but instead of giving Rachel to Jacob that night, he gave him Leah. The Bible does not say how the switch was accomplished, but in any case, Jacob slept with Leah and was shocked the next morning to find Leah in bed with him, verses 23 to 25. Outraged, Jacob demanded to know why Laban had given him Leah in spite of the fact that he had worked 7 years for Rachel's hand. Laban, unapologetic for his trickery, simply told Jacob that it was tradition that the older daughter be married first, verse 26. He did, however, tell Jacob that he could still have Rachel if he worked another 7 years. After the bridal week with Leah was over, verse 27, Rachel was also wed to Jacob. Leah thus had to share her new husband with her sister after only 1 week alone with him. Sadly, Jacob was obvious in loving Rachel over Leah. But the Lord had compassion on Leah and allowed her to conceive, Genesis 29 verse 31. Leah bore a son, whom she named Reuben. The name, meaning see a son, sounds similar to the Hebrew word that means he has seen my misery. Leah had 3 more sons by Jacob, and she named them Simeon, Levi, and Judah, verses 33 to 35. Meanwhile, Rachel became jealous of her sister's fertility, as she herself was barren. So Rachel followed the cultural standard of the day and gave her maid, Bilhah, to Jacob as a wife so the two would produce children for her, Genesis 30 verse 3. Jacob had 2 sons by Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali. Leah herself had stopped having children, and seeing her sister's success, she also gave her maid to Jacob, verse 9. Leah's maid, Zilpah, had 2 sons, Gad and Asher, and since the boys were legally Leah's, Leah rejoiced at having given Jacob more offspring. Leah and Rachel's rivalry continued, mainly on Rachel's part, as she still had no sons from her own body. One day, Leah's son Reuben brought her some mandrakes from the field. In ancient times, mandrake roots were eaten as an aphrodisiac and as a supposed cure for barrenness. Rachel desired the mandrakes as a cure for her infertility, and she asked Leah for them. Leah responded, "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" Genesis 30 verse 15. So Rachel traded the one thing that was in her power to give a night with Jacob. In exchange for the mandrake roots, Rachel allowed Leah to sleep with Jacob. Leah held her to the bargain, and that night God allowed her to conceive another son, whom she named Issachar. After Issachar, Leah had 2 more children, Zebulun and Dinah. Dinah is the only daughter of Jacob. In spite of how Leah was treated by her husband and sister, God blessed her richly in the form of motherhood. But there was more. Her 3rd son, Levi, became the father of the tribe of Israel that was chosen to serve the Lord in the tabernacle and later the temple. And her 4th son, Judah, became the father of the line through which God carried out his covenant with Jacob's grandfather Abraham. God had promised that one day all people would be blessed through Abraham's seed, Genesis 12 verses 1 to 3, 22:17-18. This blessing came in the form of Jesus Christ, who came as a sacrifice for the sin of the world, John 3 verse 16. Jesus was of the tribe of Judah and therefore a descendant of Leah. What can we learn from Leah and Rachel? 1. What God considers unfading beauty. Have you ever felt left out, looked over, or rejected? It can be clear that Jacob's negative reaction to waking up with Leah as his bride, and not his desired pick Rachel, was taken by Leah as a flashing neon sign of rejection. To be fair, it was Laban that is to blame for this wife swap, but I know as well as you do that Leah felt looked over. In the Bible, she is first described as having weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Genesis 29 verse 17 too. Jealousy blinds us to God's blessings. Jealousy is an ugly emotion and something that we all can, unfortunately, relate to. Jealousy can creep up into any type of situation and does not just affect one type of person more than another. In the case of Leah and Rachel, I think it's safe to say that both of them had to deal with the ugly side of jealousy by feeling it themselves and being on the receiving end. Starting with Leah, we see at the very beginning that she is not only described as the less attractive sister, but also that her father used the fact of her being the oldest and still single sister as reason to trick Jacob into marrying her first. 3. God pursues us, even if no one else does. As a woman, we are designed to be pursued. It's by God's design that our hearts race when we are pursued in a romantic relationship by a man that our heart also desires. As we see in Jacob's deep desire for Rachel to be his bride, he worked for Laban not just 7 years, but 14 years, even with a big switcheroo played on him in the middle. I am sure that made Rachel feel like the queen of the ball that a man desired her that much. On the opposite side, we can only imagine the deep longing that Leah had to be wanted by Jacob. She bore him multiple children, and it was clear that each time she would hope that he would finally want her as he did Rachel. Again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son she said, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Genesis 29 verse 14. God's plan for security, what we can learn from Leah and Rachel. In this story of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel we see how God worked through this family to bring about his will by their sons eventually making up the 12 tribes of Israel. What sticks out to me is that things aren't always as they seem. In the case of Leah, she was rejected, dealt with the emotions of jealousy, and deeply desired to be pursued. What she realized was that though her own sister Rachel was wanted and pursued, Rachel herself had her own demons to deal with, including jealousy and anger. A husband didn't fix that. Leah found her security in her Lord, and no one could take that away. May we be reminded that God's plan for our lives doesn't always end up with us being the star of a romantic comedy, being the most popular, or named the most beautiful. We won't be promised a pain-free life, but what we are given is so much more. Security in God's love, his pursuit of us, and the desire to use our lives for his glory can manifest into a love story that is far more special than anything you could see on the silver screen.